All right, everyone, we have a whole slew of new polling, and Biden's approval, as I said it probably would, has collapsed again. The gap between his disapproval and approval is now almost 15 points. That's up from about 10 points only a few days ago. Now, this is not quite that large a collapse. Part of it is because you had some push polling going on, specifically related to the disapproval numbers in the last round of polling. So his disapproval was being dragged down artificially. One of those polls is absent from the new aggregate, which has made it look like it's much more of a rise in disapproval. It's significant when it's paired with the fall in approval. That is, that you've got the divergence of those two numbers at the same time in the same round of polling. So even if it's only like a point for each one, the gap itself grows considerably. Keep in mind that it's more than 1 million voters that you're talking about per point within that aggregate. So that's several million people that have switched sides, that either supported him, now don't, were ambivalent, now don't, were ambivalent, now hate him. The problem is this. This is just a hypothetical, this is my own opinion. Looking at his numbers, looking at his personality, looking at political history. Trump had an advantage. He had a disadvantage in that he was pounded 24/7 with propaganda, which was usually spurious. That lowered his ceiling that he could ever hit as far as approval, but he also had a high floor. There was a very narrow actual window, except towards the end and right at the beginning, that he was within. It was like a 10-point spread. Biden doesn't, I think, have that advantage. That is, he doesn't have necessarily a low ceiling sort of situation, because the media treats him with kid gloves. He's not subject to harassment by big tech, etc. But I don't think that he has a high floor either. That's a huge disadvantage to him. His soft floor, I think he's already at, possibly below. That's partially because everything that can go wrong is going wrong. Ukraine is now the icing on the cake. His comments the other day were so indefensible regarding Ukraine and regarding his own first year in office that even the people at CNN are shaking their heads in bewilderment at him. The writing is on the wall. Biden's administration, his asterisk administration, has failed. He is now effectively a lame duck after just 1 year in office. The chances of him doing anything meaningful over the next year, when he doesn't have a mandate as far as public opinion, he doesn't have command of a partisan Senate, he doesn't have a willingness to undo the filibuster, the only things that he can accomplish require the will of several Republicans in the Senate. Now, you do have rhinos like Romney and Crenshaw in office, in the House, in the Senate. You do have that. But it's not enough. So what's he going to do? He's not going to get Build Back Better. He's not going to get OSHA mandate. He's not going to get election takeover. He's got nothing. Everything will metastasize over the course of the next year. He will be reduced to screaming obstruction in the midterms. He'll probably be largely an absentee. Now, before I go into this further, there will be a link in the description archive, by the way. You'll have to refresh that archival link every week or so if you want to see current numbers on the RCP aggregate. Down below, though, if you're watching on YouTube, keep in mind there will be a pinned comment with links to other sites that I host videos on. I make exclusive content every single day on those sites. It does not go on YouTube. We're approaching 61,000 on Rumble now, 60,000 on Odyssey, and getting up towards 150,000 people following just on BitChute. So YouTube at this point can kiss my ass, as Rand Paul would say, with their fucking censorship. Biden's approval is now deep underwater. He's slightly below where Trump was at the same time in his presidency, and keep in mind what was happening then. Trump was facing obstruction on ACA mandate and wall funding and everything else. People were beginning to sour and giving him undue discredit because other Republicans, especially in the House, were blockading funding for the things that he wanted to do. Well, it's too expensive. It's going to cost millions of dollars. How can we secure the border? The funding was already there. He dug it out. It took a couple of years. He finally got it in the twilight of his presidency. But at first, think about what was happening in Trump's presidency. By this time, you had a year of propaganda from the legacy media calling him every name under the sun. He's dangerous, he's bigoted, he's a horrible person. The economy had not yet picked up full steam. That's in the second half of his first year. He'll probably get another one, judging by how badly Biden's doing and how discredited the Democrats are right now. If he runs, There's a pretty goddamn good chance, especially because now there's no refortification of the defortified state elections in Arizona, New Hampshire, Florida, and other states are pending. Keeping that in mind, exciting things are ahead for the next few years. I'm definitely going to enjoy things. Despite nonstop propaganda, an economy, again, that hadn't fully picked up speed. That's year 2 and 3 mainly, before coronavirus, but after the first year where he was focused on other things. He didn't yet have his DPRK success. He didn't yet, I believe, have tax reform success. Ultimately, at this moment in time in Trump's presidency, he hadn't yet gotten a chance to do a lot because of obstruction within his own party. And yet his approval, at the same point, despite Biden getting the kid glove treatment, having largely the will of his party, except when he overstretches, which he is doing to get the leftoids in the House mainly to glom onto his bill. You got a 5-seat majority, but you've got 7 people that might say no if you don't give them enough, because they have to stand on principle, or even further left people will unseat them, AOC, Ilhan Omar, etc. Biden is incapable structurally of doing anything, but he gets nonstop glowing praise largely for everything that he does. And yet he's lower in approval. That's pretty damning, considering, again, the situation that Trump found himself at the same point in his presidency, 99% negative coverage for an entire year, constant protests, constant race-baiting id-poll horseshit from the legacy media and from big tech, constant attempts to harass and censor people who supported him had already kicked in by that point. They kicked in the fucking primaries, let alone once the general was held. So half of his fans at that point were being silenced. They can't add as much to the public conversation if they're not using mainline platforms, because back then alt tech hadn't taken off quite as much, had it in 2016 or 17. Little bit further ahead, a half decade on. Rumble is bigger than it was in 2017. BitChute and Odyssey are bigger. Substack has more than 2 users. Subscribestar exists. Mine is bigger. Getter exists. For what it's worth. Tim Pool crucifying them the other day. I'm getting skeptical about bothering to continue to use the platform. Similar with Parler. I'm just going to put that out there, and I'm no Torba super fan because he's nuts with the religious issue, but yeah, there's some problems with these platforms. Leadership, particularly. Stay tuned. I'll look into it further. Anyway, I would say at this particular juncture, if I had to guess the trajectory, we're looking at a really long-term, it's basically the whole year, really linear drop in approval. Since the sweetheart period wore off anyway. Since that first, a couple of months, everything after that's been pretty linear. It goes up and down within that linear decline in approval, but it's pretty formulaic. If he has surpassed his soft floor, the only thing that's going to ever hold him up is a hard floor. That's deep partisan Democrats. That's like 30%. It's not at 40, which is where his approval is at now. It's closer to 30. Same would be true with the Republicans. Theirs in the past was lower. That'd be like 25. There weren't as many Republicans. Now, the Republicans have the advantage. They have a registry advantage for the first time in living memory of any significance. If he has already dropped below that, what you can have is a death spiral. You have to have negative coverage. The public finally demands it. You have more and more Democrats demoralized, and they demoralize one another. And so his approval continues to drop because he takes the buck. Even if he's not personally responsible for everything. Technically speaking, Manchin and Sinema are responsible for not passing the election bill, which most sane Democrats don't support. So we're talking about the non-core partisans, people with an independent brain cell in their brain, don't support the idea that the nation should deeply change its election system. The Democrats were handed effectively a tied Senate, a very slim majority in the House. They lost virtually everything on the state and local level in the last election, and Hong Kong, they were handed narrowly an asterisk administration. They were given an inch, and now they're trying to take 10 feet. Biden is in the position where he takes the blame despite the fact that you have to maintain those 7 very far left House seats while also placating not just Manchin and Sinema, but in the absence of undoing the filibuster, also getting several Republicans on board. So you have to have Mitch McConnell or Mitt Romney agree with AOC. That's his problem. This was predictable. I certainly predicted it. Other commentators did. And it has strangulated his presidency. I think he'll be sub 40 in approval soon. He'll be slightly below where Trump was at. And this will be despite largely positive coverage that nobody questions his mental health in the legacy media. Did you see his speech the other day on President's Day? He was goddamn incoherent throughout most of it. The White House immediately went into damage control mode with regards to him questioning the legitimacy of our election systems if we don't allow him to federalize them. Meanwhile, they almost ignored the fact that he said, oh yeah, if Russia invades Ukraine and it's just a little incursion, they're not going to face big consequences. What the fuck are you talking about? You basically gave John Bolton a reason to come out and go on the warpath, by the way. His CIA glowing one freak buddies are probably already over there trying to foment a terrorist attack to justify an incursion into Russia. So, thanks Biden for setting us up possibly for World War III. Now imagine, World War III starts, nukes are flying and everything's blowing up. Biden gives an address where he's basically like, fuck, we're all doomed, it's over, bye everyone, I'm going to go back to Delaware to live out my last few hours in radioactive wonderland. And CNN, the last reporter still live and still there at CNN because he's got no life because he's a total spurg, would be live on the air, oh, Biden gave a soaring speech to remember humanity by. They would still be covering for his ass because they have no morals. Anyway, yeah, he'll be sub 40. Now, this isn't the end of the drop. This is the beginning of this drop. This is prefaced on January 6th, January 20th, in a couple of the polls, and the new inflation numbers. And also diplomacy, Ukraine and so forth. The border is still weighing around his neck like an albatross. Not that it's affecting him much. I think anyone at this point who cared much about the border is already off the Biden train. Unless they live a sheltered existence. They're from the upper middle class and they're gated communities. See, there's a wall up around that. So they're like, oh, illegals? I don't see any. There are no illegals in my sports car village in the Hamptons. No, I don't see them. Well, there's one questionable dude. He works at the local the late night gas station and sells shitty treats. He sells me Twinkies. When my wife is not looking, I go out at night and get Twinkies and Marlboros and pretend that I'm still in my 20s. That's what's happening. Joe Biden has no hard support anymore. I definitely think he has penetrated his soft floor. I would put that at around 42, 43. Soft floor. Partisan Dems, lean lefters, people who are like, well, Orange Man bad. Once Orange Man bad dries up as a selling point, his approval will continue to drop past that floor. That's about all. Peace out.